My mother was carrying a tray of tea when my sister-in-law smiled and asked, "Excuse me, could you wipe the kitchen counter before our guests arrive?" The room went silent. She wasn't joking. She genuinely believed the woman who had opened the front door worked there. I watched my mother's smile disappear. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't simply an embarrassing mistake. It was the beginning of something far worse. My name is Monifa, a 35-year-old technology consultant who spent nearly 15 years building a career across East Africa. Every promotion, every late night, every sacrifice had one purpose: to give my widowed mother the peaceful retirement she never allowed herself to dream about. When I finally bought a beautiful home for her, it wasn't a reward. It was a thank you. She had spent her entire life raising my brother and me after my father passed away. My older brother appreciated the gift. His wife, Halima, admired something else. Not the memories, not the love, the lifestyle. Within weeks, she treated my mother's home as if it were the family's newest status symbol. I ignored the small warning signs until one sentence changed everything. The day my mother moved into her new house, she stood in the living room holding our old family photos. One by one, she placed them on the shelves with a smile on her face. Then tears filled her eyes. She looked at me and said it was the happiest day of her life. After many years of hard work and sacrifice, she finally had a home she could truly call her own. Every weekend, our relatives came to visit, and our neighbors welcomed her with kindness. The house was always full of warm conversations, laughter, and happy memories. Seeing her so peaceful made every year of my hard work feel worth it. But after a few weeks, things slowly started to change. My brother's wife, Halima, began making small decisions without asking anyone. At first, she said the curtains looked old, so she replaced them with new ones. Then she moved the sofas and tables because she said the house needed a more modern look. Every time she visited, she found something else she wanted to change. Soon she was talking about painting walls, changing cabinets, and even making bigger renovations as if the house already belonged to her. She never asked my mother what she wanted. She simply acted like her own opinion was the only one that mattered. My mother never argued with her. She just smiled politely and stayed quiet because she wanted to keep peace in the family. But I began noticing small changes in her. She stopped moving things around the way she liked. Before sitting somewhere, she looked around as if she needed approval. Even simple choices made her hesitate. The home that was supposed to give her comfort was slowly becoming a place where she no longer felt completely free. Watching that quiet change in her hurt me more than I could explain. One Sunday, I planned a small birthday lunch for my mother. She did not want a big party. She only wanted to spend time with the people she loved. I invited close relatives, a few family friends, and some kind neighbors who had become part of her life. The house was full of happy conversations. Everyone was smiling, sharing stories, and enjoying the afternoon. Looking around the room, I felt proud because this was exactly the peaceful life I had always wanted for my mother. Even though it was her birthday, Mom refused to sit down and let others do the work. She had always been like that. She believed guests should be treated with care. She went into the kitchen again and again, making sure every plate was full and every glass had something to drink. I told her many times to relax because it was her special day, but she only smiled and said she was happiest when everyone else was comfortable. A little later, she picked up a tray filled with tea and snacks and walked toward the dining table. Everyone looked at her with warm smiles. Then, before she could place the tray down, Halima looked around the room with a smile on her face and said loudly, "The maid is amazing. She keeps this place spotless." For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Then a few guests laughed because they thought Halima was making a harmless joke. They believed everyone would laugh together. But my mother did not smile. She stood there holding the tray, and I saw the happiness disappear from her face. Without saying a single word, she slowly placed the tray on the table. She looked down for a moment, turned around, and quietly walked back to the kitchen. The room suddenly felt different. The laughter stopped. Some guests looked confused, while others avoided looking at my mother. No one knew what to say. No one got up to check on her. They stayed where they were, hoping the uncomfortable moment would pass on its own. I could not sit there pretending nothing had happened. I stood up immediately and followed my mother into the kitchen. I knew she had not walked away because she was tired. She had walked away because someone had made her feel like a stranger inside the home that belonged to her. I walked into the kitchen and found my mother standing quietly by the sink. Her back was facing me as she looked out the window into the garden. The birthday lunch was still going on in the next room. I could hear people talking and laughing again, trying to move past what had just happened. But inside the kitchen, everything felt different. My mother was completely still. She was not washing dishes or cleaning the counter. She was simply standing there, lost in her thoughts. I slowly walked closer and gently asked, "Mom, are you all right?" She did not answer right away. She took a deep breath and kept looking outside for a few more seconds. Then she turned toward me with a small smile. It was the kind of smile a person gives when they do not want others to worry. I had seen that smile many times before. It always hid pain. Very softly she said, "Maybe I should stop making people uncomfortable by helping in my own house." The moment I heard those words, my heart felt heavy. My mother was not upset because someone had called her a maid. She was blaming herself for making other people uncomfortable. She had spent her whole life putting others before herself, and now she was questioning whether she even belonged in the house that was hers. I looked at her and realized she was not angry with Halima. She was embarrassed. She felt ashamed in front of our relatives and neighbors. On the one day that was supposed to celebrate her life, she had been made to feel small inside her own home. I held her hand and told her she had done nothing wrong. I reminded her that she had every right to welcome guests, serve food, and enjoy every corner of this house. She smiled again, but I could tell she was still hurting. Her eyes no longer had the same joy they had that morning. As I stood beside her, everything suddenly became clear. This was not just one careless joke or one bad moment. It explained the small changes I had been noticing for weeks. My mother had become quieter. She had stopped making simple decisions without thinking twice. Little by little, someone had made her feel like she needed permission to live freely in her own home. At that moment, I knew this problem had been growing for much longer than I had realized. A few days after my mother's birthday, I was leaving the house for work when our elderly neighbor called my name from across the street. She was a kind woman who had known my mother since the day she moved into the neighborhood. She always greeted us with a smile, but that morning, she looked nervous. She slowly walked toward me and asked if she could speak with me for a few minutes. I could tell something was bothering her. She looked around for a moment before speaking. Then she quietly said, "I hope you don't think I'm trying to cause trouble." I stayed silent because I thought, it wasn't my place. But after what happened at the birthday lunch, I feel you should know the truth. I thanked her and told her she could tell me anything. She took a deep breath and began sharing things I had never seen because I was often traveling for work. She told me that whenever people visited the house while I was away, Halima acted like she was the owner. She welcomed guests with confidence and often introduced the property as our family estate. Many people believed the house belonged to her and my brother because of the way she spoke. My mother would just stand nearby with a polite smile, saying nothing. The neighbor also told me about delivery workers bringing furniture, packages, and other items. Instead of asking for my mother, Halima would quickly step forward and tell them to contact her directly if they ever needed anything about the house. Soon, several delivery drivers stopped asking for my mother at all. They only looked for Halima because that was what they had been told. As I listened, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. None of these moments seemed big on their own, but together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. This was not one careless comment at a birthday lunch. It was a pattern that had been growing quietly for weeks. The neighbor gently placed her hand on my arm and said she had often noticed my mother's face after these moments. She never complained, but she looked uncomfortable in her own yard. She acted more like a guest than the woman who actually lived there. Walking back toward the house, everything finally made sense. Halima had not been making innocent mistakes. She had slowly taken control of conversations, decisions, and even other people's opinions. This was not simple disrespect anymore. Without asking for permission, she had quietly started acting like the house already belonged to her. A few evenings later, I stopped by my mother's house after work. We were sitting together in the living room, drinking tea, when she suddenly looked around the table with a confused expression. Then she quietly asked, "Have you seen the spare house keys? I always keep them in the small drawer near the front door, but I can't find them anywhere." At first, I thought they had simply been misplaced. I smiled and told her we would find them. We searched the drawer, the kitchen, and even her bedroom, but the keys were nowhere to be found. My mother did not complain. She only said maybe she had forgotten where she put them. That answer did not sound like her. She was always careful with important things. I asked my brother if he had seen the keys. He shook his head and said he had no idea. Halima also acted surprised. She said she had never noticed the spare keys and quickly changed the subject. Everyone behaved as though it was a small problem that would solve itself. My mother did not want to make anyone uncomfortable, so she stopped talking about it. A few days later, I arrived at the house earlier than expected. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed Halima unlocking it with a key I had never seen before. She looked surprised to see me standing there. I asked her where she got that key. She smiled casually and said she had made an extra copy because it was easier than asking someone to open the door every time she visited. Her answer immediately made me uncomfortable. I asked her who had given permission to copy the house keys. She looked at me and laughed, as if I had asked the funniest question in the world. "We're family," she said. "Why are you making such a big issue out of keys?" I stayed calm, but inside I felt something change. This was never about a piece of metal. It was about respect. It was about asking before making decisions in someone else's home. My mother had not been told that extra keys existed. I had not been told either. Yet copies had been made as if nobody else's opinion mattered. I looked at my mother. She stood quietly beside the door, saying nothing. She seemed uncomfortable again, almost afraid to speak. That hurt more than Halima's words. As I drove home that night, I kept thinking about everything that had happened. First, it was the curtains, then the furniture, then speaking like the house belonged to her. Now it was the keys. One small decision after another, the boundaries around my mother's home were slowly disappearing. None of these moments seemed huge by themselves, but together they told a clear story. Someone was slowly taking control, and everyone else was expected to accept it without asking questions. Until that point, my brother believed I was making the situation much bigger than it really was. Every time I tried to explain how uncomfortable Mom had become, he defended Halima. He told me she only wanted to help. He said she liked decorating homes and was only trying to make the house look nicer. He kept reminding me that we were all family and that family should not argue over small things. No matter what I said, he believed I was looking for problems where there were none. I stopped trying to convince him because every conversation ended the same way. He would ask me to be patient, and I would leave feeling even more frustrated. I knew what I had seen. I knew how much my mother had changed, but he refused to believe that Halima's behavior was hurting anyone. A few weeks later, our neighborhood held a small evening gathering. Families came together to enjoy food and spend time with one another. My mother was talking with a few neighbors while I helped arrange some chairs. My brother was standing nearby speaking with another guest. Halima had joined a group of people who were asking about the beautiful house. At first, the conversation sounded normal. She smiled proudly while talking about the property. Then my brother suddenly became quiet. He had heard something that caught his attention. Halima pointed toward the house and said they had many plans for it. She talked about changing the kitchen, rebuilding the front garden, adding a larger balcony, and replacing several rooms with a more modern design. She spoke with complete confidence, as if every decision had already been made. One guest smiled and asked if my mother liked those ideas. Halima laughed softly and answered, "She has enjoyed the house long enough. It's time for a fresh start." The words were simple, but they carried a meaning that could not be ignored. My brother's face changed immediately. He was standing only a few feet away, and he had heard every word. For the first time, he looked at Halima with confusion instead of agreement. Then he looked toward our mother, who was happily talking with the neighbors, completely unaware of what was being said behind her back. In that moment, I could see the truth finally reaching him. Halima was not talking like someone who wanted to support our mother. She was speaking like someone already planning life after pushing her aside. When we left the gathering that evening, my brother stayed unusually quiet. He did not defend Halima. He did not tell me I was overreacting. He simply stared out the car window, thinking about everything he had heard. For the first time, he understood why I had been so worried all along. After everything that had happened, I knew I could not keep having private conversations that changed nothing. I did not want more arguments or people choosing sides. I wanted everyone to hear the truth at the same time. So I invited our close family to dinner at my mother's house. My brother came with Halima, and several relatives also joined us. They thought it was just another family meal, but I hoped it would finally clear away all the confusion that had been building for weeks. We ate together peacefully. Nobody argued. Nobody raised their voice. When dinner was over, everyone stayed at the table talking and enjoying tea. I looked around the room and realized this was the right moment. I did not make a long speech. I did not point at anyone or accuse anyone of doing wrong. I simply looked at everyone and asked one question. When does generosity become permission? The room became completely quiet. People looked at one another, trying to understand what I meant. Then I calmly explained that buying my mother a home had been an act of love, not an invitation for others to make decisions for her. Helping someone should never mean taking control of their life. One by one, our relatives began sharing their thoughts. A few admitted they had believed Halima was making changes because my mother had approved them. Others said they assumed my mother was happy with every decision because she never complained. They had never imagined she was staying silent to avoid conflict. Then my mother quietly spoke. She looked at everyone with a gentle smile and said she had remained silent because she did not want the family to fight. She was afraid that if she spoke up, people would think she was creating problems or trying to separate the family. So she accepted things that made her uncomfortable instead of protecting her own peace. Her words filled the room with silence again. Some relatives lowered their heads. Others looked at Halima without saying anything. At that moment, everyone finally understood what had really happened. My mother's silence had been mistaken for agreement. Her kindness had allowed others to cross boundaries they should never have crossed. We all realized the same painful truth. Silence had not protected the family. It had protected the wrong person. And the longer everyone ignored the problem, the easier it had become for respect to disappear from the very home that was meant to give my mother comfort and peace. After that family dinner, I spent many nights thinking about everything that had happened. I was not interested in punishing anyone or proving that I had been right. My only goal was to make sure my mother could finally live in peace. I had bought that house to give her comfort, not stress. If I allowed things to continue the way they were, nothing would ever change. So I decided it was time to set clear boundaries. Over the next few weeks, I made several changes. I spoke kindly but firmly with everyone involved. I explained that the house belonged to my mother and that every important decision about it would come from her. If anyone wanted to make a suggestion, they would ask her first. Nothing would be changed without her agreement. There would be no more surprise decisions, no more moving furniture, and no more talking about future renovations as if someone else owned the place. I also made sure that access to the house was clear. Everyone understood who had keys and why. No extra copies would be made without my mother's knowledge. Visiting the house was always welcome, but respecting the person who lived there was no longer optional. These were not harsh rules. They were simple boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. At first, everything felt a little quiet. Everyone was adjusting to the new situation. But slowly, I began noticing something beautiful. My mother started smiling the way she had when she first moved into the house. She no longer looked worried before making small decisions. She stopped asking if certain things were okay to do in her own home. One morning, I arrived and found her happily working in the garden. She had planted colorful flowers and was carefully watering them. A few days later, I visited again and saw neighbors sitting on the front porch, drinking tea with her. She was laughing freely, sharing stories, and enjoying their company without looking around to see if someone approved. Inside the house, she began moving things exactly where she wanted them. She displayed family photos again, arranged the furniture the way she liked, and filled every room with her own personal touch. The warmth that had slowly disappeared was finally returning. As I watched her enjoying her home again, I realized something important. The house had never needed expensive decorations or perfect furniture to feel special. It only needed the right person to feel safe inside it. Little by little, my mother stopped feeling like a guest in her own home. At last, it truly became hers again. Several months passed after everything changed at my mother's house. Life slowly became peaceful again. The tension that had once filled every family gathering began to disappear. But that did not happen because everyone forgot what had happened. It happened because we finally stopped pretending everything was fine. We chose to face the truth instead of hiding from it. One evening, my brother called and asked if we could meet for coffee. We had not spent time alone in a long while. When we sat down together, there was an awkward silence at first. Then he looked at me and quietly said, "I owe you an apology." Those simple words meant more to me than he probably realized. He admitted that he had spent months defending Halima without really paying attention to how her mother felt. He believed that standing by his wife meant agreeing with everything she did. Looking back, he realized those were not the same thing. A husband could support his wife while also telling her when she had crossed a line. By staying silent, he had allowed small problems to become much bigger ones. I listened without interrupting. I had waited a long time to hear those words, but I did not want to make him feel worse. I only wanted us to understand each other again. Our conversations became more honest after that day. Instead of avoiding difficult topics, we talked about them calmly. We spoke about our father, about the values our mother had taught us, and about the kind of family we wanted to become. Those talks helped rebuild the trust that had been damaged. Halima also faced difficult conversations with the family. This time, people did not laugh uncomfortable moments away or pretend nothing had happened. Several relatives kindly but honestly told her that respect could not be replaced with good intentions or polite smiles. They reminded her that being part of a family did not give anyone the right to take control of another person's home or ignore their feelings. She tried to explain herself, but she also realized that simple excuses could not erase months of hurt. If she wanted people to trust her again, she would have to show real change through her actions. As time passed, we all learned an important lesson. Family is not measured by the words people speak during happy moments. It is measured by how they treat one another every single day. Respect is not something you ask others to believe. It is something you quietly prove through kindness, honesty, and the choices you make when no one is watching. One quiet evening, a few months later, my mother asked me to sit with her on the front porch. The day was coming to an end, and everything around us felt peaceful. The flowers she had planted were blooming, and the garden she cared for every morning was full of life. Neighbors walked by and waved at her with warm smiles. She waved back with confidence, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the same happy woman I had always known. We sat together without speaking for a few minutes. There was no need to fill the silence. I looked around the house and remembered everything that had happened. I thought about the excitement of buying it, the pain of watching my mother lose her confidence, and the long journey it took to make this place feel like home again. Then my mother gently reached over and held my hand. She smiled at me with tears in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of sadness. She quietly said, "You thought you bought me a home." I smiled and nodded. Then she squeezed my hand a little tighter and continued, "What you really gave me was the courage to believe I still deserved one." For a moment, I could not speak. Her words touched my heart in a way nothing else could. I had spent years working hard to save enough money for this house. I believed the greatest gift I could ever give my mother was a beautiful place to live. But she helped me understand that the house itself was never the greatest gift. I looked around once more. The walls were the same. The furniture was the same. The garden was growing beautifully. Yet everything felt different because my mother finally felt safe inside her own home. She laughed freely, welcomed people without fear, and made every decision with confidence. She no longer looked for permission to enjoy the life she had earned. At that moment, I realized that a home's true value can never be measured by its price or its size. It is measured by the peace, dignity, and happiness of the person living inside it. No amount of money can replace the feeling of being respected in your own home. No expensive house means anything if the person living there feels unwanted. But when someone feels safe enough to be themselves without fear or shame, that house becomes priceless. And seeing my mother smile again was worth far more than every dollar I had spent to buy it. Sometimes disrespect doesn't arrive with shouting. It slips quietly into everyday moments until someone finally chooses to say, "Enough." Because protecting the people who protected you is never selfish. It's gratitude in its purest form. If someone disrespected your mother inside the home you bought for her, what would you have done? Share your answer in the comments below. And if stories about family, loyalty, and unforgettable life lessons inspire you, subscribe for the next emotional journey.